we are going to, I guess I'll say something about myself. I live in Oakland as a single mom, and was one of the founders of the Children's Village when we had the encampment at Oakland, and have dabbled in work all over the place, but am really excited that this panel is happening, because it's like one of the most important things that we need to be talking about, since this world that we're trying to create is absolutely largely for children to inherit. So there's a very unique place that mothers and parents have in this movement, and so yeah. So we will start with China. And she's Skyping in, and China Martins is the author of Future Generation and co-editor of the zine Don't Leave Your Friends Behind, which many of us are familiar with, and there are copies over here if you want to pick one up. She's also co-founder of Kid City, which is a radical childcare collective in Baltimore. So, are you ready? Sorry, we're just going to do the technical difficulty part real quick and get it out of the way with, and then hopefully we won't have to do it again. Hi, China.
Hello. Can you see me?
I can't see you yet. Can you turn on your camera?
I can't see you yet. Okay, can you see me now?
We can see you now. I'm going to turn off my camera, but you'll be able to hear me.
Okay. Okay, I'm hearing kind of an echo. Can I put these screens open?
Okay, so make sure you just have your one Skype open.
Okay, so right now I turn off the live stream. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello. Now I can't see you.
I turned myself off so that everybody else doesn't have to look at me twice.
Okay, but you all can see me.
We can see you. You look lovely.
Hi, I'm looking into my computer. Like, I'm sitting in my bedroom at my desk, and I have like a fixed computer. So I'm just like staring into the computer. So I'm sorry the light from the back is kind of, it's like the bedroom, and there's like the cats. And this is where I'm writing. This is where most of last year I was working on editing this book. The year that's behind. And I guess the year before too. So it feels really weird because I can't see you guys, I'm just talking to my computer. And I guess what I wanted to share, like how vulnerable it can be to be a mother, even when you think that you're not, because your child is grown. You know, like when Clara was 18, I was like, nobody can take you away from me now. You know, I can say anything I want, but you can't really. I mean, as a writer, it can still be difficult to be a mother and a writer. Yeah, there's such intense vulnerability sometimes between trying to work on building, creating more support, but then also, I don't know, that strange catch-22 that's really intense when you're after the mother. I still feel it in different ways for being like an emptiness, radical mother. So I guess that's what I wanted to share. I wish it was there and we could talk, like, we're face-to-face. Because right now I can't see you guys. You're anything. Coming back. I think I would like open it up to questions now.
Okay, give me just a second. I'm gonna try one technical thing, and while we open it up to questions and see if it works, okay? Just so that we can hear you even louder. Everyone can hear you, but I'm just gonna try this one thing. China, do you mind just saying like test for me? Okay. Alright, okay, so that didn't work. Alright, so I'd like to open it up to questions. Does anybody have any questions for China? I can't tell you're sewing if you're raising your hand.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. So for me, when you were talking about being vulnerable as a mother and having this moment where it was like, now I can say anything because they can't take you away from me. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like when you were afraid to say stuff because you felt like they could take your daughter away from you?
Well, I mean, the thing is when she was born, when she was like about 4 days old, CPS came to my house. But I had more positive experience than a lot of people. Like my mom was with me, and my house was too crowded and full of people, and it had very like outrageous art, and we had equipment in the kitchen, and just a very overcrowded, crazy house. And I had like long green hair, and this was like in 1988, and I had a home birth, which was like illegal. And
kind of with your daughter, like, were there times where she resented, like, was she always on board with your activism or your involvement, or were there times where it felt like she resented it, where she felt like she had to sort of compete with it? And now, how has it impacted sort of the woman that she's become?
Yeah, I mean, I think we went through a lot of stuff in teenagehood, and I feel like we went through it more because that I'm a low-income single mother, so it makes it more difficult to be my child. But she kind of went through a conservative rebellion of me, where she was kind of like a Democrat. She was gonna vote, and she wanted to, keep staying in school, and which is good. I respect, I came to respect like her drive to school, and then she like dropped out of school. Like she was always changing. But we had totally like classic mother-daughter teenage stuff that I never ever thought would happen to me. And now I can recognize it and look at it. I look at others and I can see, what's going on. It's often healthy, just having space away from each other. And then, she definitely turned around to be super, super close, super respectful, and glad to be my child. Like, first time she got 18, she got tattooed on her back, made in China. And like we talked a lot about like art and I don't know. Geez, I can't explain it, but having a relationship with your grown child is like my favorite thing of all. It's like the best thing. So I think she's just kind of a normal person, and I'm just a normal person. Like normal is weird, super weird word to use, but it's just like she's just a person like anybody else. She's a whole hybrid of things that went into making her. She's a very modern person who has like all these different things, like a new generation of person, and I don't know, like she's just a wonderful person. But it's not like you look at some kids and they're just like, oh, they're the child of the anarchists, they are like this, or like everybody's just an individual, so it's hard to yeah, like I mean she's just a great person.
We have another question for you. Hi, my name is Laura, and I work with a mental health care collective, and I guess my question, and everyone else on the panel can expect something similar from you probably, is what are ways that being a mother has impacted your ability to participate in like activist communities, anarchist communities, and stuff like that? What ways have you felt supported? Like, what are the best things that have worked for you and for your child too? Because children who are coming up in this community also need different kinds of support. I'd be super stoked to hear about that.
As pertaining to mental health?
Your own like mental well-being in terms of like dealing with your community while like having to provide a primary care role for someone, and also like how growing up in that kind of community, I guess you kind of just went over that like with your daughter, but like ways the community also supported your daughter or like failed to support your daughter.
I mean, it's so important for me. Like the number one thing, every mother is going to be different. What they need, you need to talk, you need to communicate with people. But just for me personally, like babysitting, all I needed time to myself. Like that was the most important. That was the answer to almost anything. It's babysitting. Like how can I write? I need time. How can I be a better mother? How can I anything? I needed her to go
Okay, thank you, Trina. I'm gonna take you off of the Skype monitor, and then if you're watching the live stream and you have anything that you want to add or you want to save it up till later, we can put you back on a little later.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah. Okay. Sasha, do you want to? So Sasha, you want to just introduce yourself? Or?
Sure.
Great.
Hi, I'm Sasha. I'm one of the founding members of MAMA in New York City, which was the Mothers Alliance for Militant Action. That was, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that. We did change the name to the Mothers Alliance for Mutual Aid at some point for various reasons that I won't get into. We started the group MAMA because we were finding that as parents that were activists, we were being shut out of the movement. We were being told to leave because our kids were making too much noise. There wasn't a lot of support around that, and we were all pretty amazing organizers in our own right. And we were tired of being the ones organizing childcare when we had a lot more to give. So we came together to ask for what we needed and bring more to the table. So a lot of us have moved to different states since then, and what I've been doing since then is unschooling my growing family. My oldest is 15, and then I have a 7-year-old, a 3-year-old, and one on the way. So I'm really busy with that, and I think my activism has turned more internal, where it's my everyday actions, how I'm talking to them, raising them, and teaching them. And I am a contributor in the book Don't Leave Your Friends Behind, which I talked a lot about unschooling and things that I found really useful from my friends and allies. I don't have anything specific to say, so if you have questions about any of that, that's
Do you know where your children?
No, I have no idea, actually.
I started skateboarding the other day with his friend. What's the story was the other one? Yeah.
So, yeah. No, I do know where they are, actually. Mutual aid has taken on a more natural and integral role in my life now, and it's not as contrived as it used to be. It's not an idea, it's like working, so that's really cool. And they're all doing fun Earth Day activities with friends, and I'm not worried about them at all.
Hi, okay, so my question to you is, as someone who's like raising kids in like a community that's like right now and like growing up with them and like still in the like raising process and like caring for them, what are some ways that you think the community is failing you? And what are some ways that you think would be of greater assistance, and how can we improve on supporting mothers and children in our communities?
Well, I see that a lot of the help or integration that does happen is from other mothers. There's a lot of moms getting together and helping each other out, which is great. But I find it really, I love to see when people without kids come and step up. Hi. Call you out you. Anyway. I've had a few good experiences where there are people that take a really big, crucial role, especially with unschooling, since my kids are, each one of them drastically different, and trying to support each one of them in really becoming who they are. And one example that I've been bringing up a lot lately, because it's been so amazing for me to watch, and it was really recent, is that my oldest, who's 15, is he's an amazing artist and photographer. And I had a friend who is a photographer in Barcelona who was teaching him on Skype, and they were working together. And he just took the time to like spend hours with him every single week, like working on what he wants to work on. I didn't have to worry about like special classes and stuff like that, but also that it was a really good example of someone who's living their life how they want to live it. He's like a photojournalist traveling the world and doing things on his own terms, and like showing the kids that not only was he taking the time to do it, but like a living example of like you don't have to buy into the system, you can do whatever the hell you want. And I love seeing that, and I love people bringing that to the table and like showing like just that you can be joyful doing whatever you want. Yeah. Yes.
So, in the radical community, there's like definitely, there are a lot of academics.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who seem to have like a strong attachment to like a traditional academic model because they thrived in it, they do well, and they end up here and they have lots of things to say and they're really smart. And what is your experience with people who like strongly prefer this traditional academic model in the radical community and how they interact with your unschooling kids? Or the idea of unschooling your kids?
Well, I find it really funny because a lot of people, even people like very close and in our family, can't let go of that idea of like what school and learning looks like. And they have these clear ideas, and they almost like, it's just funny to watch them interact. They want to like test the kids and like teach them in a certain way, in a way that they're not like accustomed to learning. They're not going to write papers for you or, you know, rattle off the multiplication tables. They're just not even going to do it. It's not in their realm of experience. But at the same time, they have a lot to contribute to a conversation, and I think people come around. When my youngest brother, who's just 18 now, was starting school, he was going to a school for really gifted children. And my son, who was just a couple of years younger, went with my dad to pick him up from school, and he was at 3 or 4 years old talking to him about different kinds of government. He was like talking about the difference between monarchy and anarchy and socialism and all this stuff, like as a very small child. So they were like, oh, when is that one gonna join us? My dad was real disappointed to have to tell him that he wouldn't be joining them. So, but it also was apparent even at that point that it was unnecessary for him to join that kind of environment. So, yes.
So talking about unschooling brought up a thought when we were talking about your very young child, talking about different types of government. How have your kids, or have they, as part of unschooling, developed a sense for activism? And how do you, I guess, not handle it, because it's not really a bad thing, but how do you, like, if they're really passionate about something that you're not, like, super passionate about,
Yeah.
like, how do you enable them to get involved in that movement without taking it on yourself? Because like I find like my son is really involved in like environmentalism, but he's 6, and like obviously I care about it, but I just don't have like the emotional energy to like throw everything I have into this because he's into it, but he's also not like taking seriously that he really actually wants to like help and be part of this movement and help organize things at an age-appropriate level. And so I guess like how do you balance within an activist community what they're passionate about and what you want?
Well, it's a little difficult to answer that because my experience with that has been different, where I actually most of the time get really into whatever they're into. When it comes to activism, when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh, my head flies out the window. On the other hand, I just can't get into that. My oldest, when he was younger, we would work on a lot of projects together, and we would do like puppet making and do the art and stuff to do like performance art in the streets, and we were really into that. And as he's gotten older, he's not really an activist anymore, and so it's become more difficult for me to actually just be supportive of the things that he likes when they're completely opposite of what I'm doing. Whereas my 7-year-old, he's like, he's a vegan and he's into environmental justice, and I'm very much in line with his ideas at this moment in time. Most recently, he's decided that he's boycotting palm oil, which I was happy to do for the whole house as well. And so he's continually talking about the different ways, like what else can we do, what more can we do, we have to save the orangutan, and I'm into it. So, you know, it's like I can engage in that way with him, whereas the harder part is engaging with someone who is becoming disinterested in changing what's around them. So,
but
yeah.
I guess what my real intention with the question was, I know I made it all over the place, was how do you get other activists within those communities? Like within, you're doing things at home, like boycotting palm oil and stuff, but how do you get other adult activists to take a child seriously and let them have an age-appropriate role in organizing against something that they're really passionate about, without it having to be you're doing all of the work in organizing because their role is not seen as valid?
Well, probably actually up until this year, I would have been the one doing all the organizing, and it was very frustrating. And like I said, actually now I'm at a point where mutual aid is more integrated in my life, so it feels kind of like a sweet spot. And I do have a lot of adult allies around that are more than willing to engage the kids in what they're interested in. And we do have another family living with us that's also unschooling, and they're also very much into the same kinds of things. So we're all working together, and it's all part of our flow of daily life and unschooling as we know it. So, yeah.
If there are one or two more questions, and then,
I kind of have a follow-up question and then my own question, I guess. How do you actually get to that point, though, where you have families supporting you, or like other like adult allies who can help, like for this person, help their son, Christina, she's not just help Christina and Alex like actually do work. And I guess my own question was about the shift from militant action to mutual aid, and like what kind of conflicts happened around like trying to be a mother who like wants to do militant stuff. Obviously, like you came up against some conflict in the community, and also I'm guessing usually it has to do with some sort of security aspect also. So if you can elaborate on that stuff.
Well, we've definitely had an ebb and flow to answer the first question of like how to get to the sweet spot. Like sometimes we arrive here and then it goes away again. So it's just I feel like I'm constantly working towards that, and it's what I put into my community, and eventually things come back around. Like I'm more than willing to be that person that's doing that with the children or other adults or whatever needs to happen, and it definitely comes around, and like-minded people come around and come together. We kind of gravitate towards each other. We're also kind of like a lot of people within the community are people that travel and move around, so that changes, the dynamic changes all the time. So it's hard to say like how to get to that point when that point is always going to change. To answer you about, well, the second part was about the Mothers Alliance for Militant Action.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, from that name alone, like, it sounds like you're super interested in, like, doing, like, more radical, or however, like, you want to phrase it, more militant stuff. But, I mean, generally, like, the atmosphere of, like, that kind of community is very, like, tends to be ableist, and, like, we have to be able to do this and commit this amount of time, and puts a lot of pressure on, like, being able to produce, even if that's going to a meeting and, like, doing whatever. And a lot of times, a lot of, like, follow-up support isn't provided for that. Like, so there must have been some sort of conflict around, like, establishing that, like, you felt the need to establish that apart from, like, just participating in what was happening, I guess.
Sometimes I feel like my much younger self with that young child was kind of really stupid to be so subversive, you know? Because it could have put my family in jeopardy, and it never did, and I feel like that's sheer dumb luck that it didn't. But also that we're in a much different political climate now, whereas I don't think there was too much I could have done to get into so much trouble then, whereas I could do very little now and get into a lot more trouble. There's a lot more at stake and a lot more to lose. So, also, I mean, we took some precautions where we would take turns as the mothers in the group, who was gonna take the, do the biggest action, and the rest of us would be there to, make sure nothing was happening to the kids. When I was off on my own doing actions, I would leave my son with a piece of paper with an address and a phone number and say, never go to the police. You see me get arrested, go find another mom and tell them to take you there, And that was his instruction. And again, I don't think I would do that now. I wouldn't make that choice now. That was a much younger version of myself that made decisions like that. We did change the name to the Mothers Alliance for mutual aid because being the Mothers Alliance for Militant Action kept us a small group of 5 to 10 people, whereas I think mutual aid is a more appealing aspect than making trouble, And I see both of those as being useful. I think militant action is necessary and mutual aid is necessary. And I do a lot more of the second part of that now than I do of the first part, and that's fine. It feels good. Maybe I'll come to a point where I'm more militant again. Who knows? Maybe I won't.
So I'm sorry to do another technical thing, but in order to try and make the person that we're Skyping in next loud enough for everybody to hear, we're just going to test the sound. And so give me just a second. If people will just bear with me in a second. Alright, so we're gonna, okay, so, yeah. You have your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask
please.
a question about, kind of a twofold question. One, like how much support for either unschooling or homeschooling did you get or not get from people you thought you would be getting it from, like old activists from our parents' generation, or activists or what of this generation? How much support or not support did you get in that? And I guess the other half of that question is, how much ageism did you experience from the same groups towards the children?
Well, I actually got much less support than I thought I would get, because I think in theory most of the people in our community would say that unschooling is without a doubt the thing that people should do with their kids, and reject the system and reject the school system, and but at the same time, when you're looking to be part of the movement and your kids are making noise in there, people are wondering why they're not in school, because it's automatically the fallback child care, and it's so strange to me how they could dissociate that's exactly why they're there. So it was actually startling to me, and it took a long time to create what I wanted and ask for what I needed and continually explain to people why I wasn't going to put my kids in school. So, but we're getting there. I forgot what the second part of your question was.
Ageism.
Ageism, all the time. Yeah. I think people underestimate what the kids can do and what they want to be doing, and dumb things down when they just really, it's unnecessary. It's unnecessary to do that. You can have a conversation with anyone about anything. If they don't understand, they'll ask you, So, but I definitely find that people want to dumb things down or hide things, and it's again, I think because they just don't understand, and they don't understand that also maybe I won't get mad, if they take on a really touchy subject, I'm not going to get mad that they're talking to my kids about that work, because other people might. get upset, you know? So I think ageism also comes with sort of this fear of like what other people are going to think about what you are saying and doing, whereas it's not really about what they really think about your kids.
Do you have any resources you would recommend as far as like unschooling children? I'm sort of always on the hunt for like books or games or whatever that instill like certain politicized or whatever things.
There's so many resources. It's a sort of overwhelming question, but also there's a lot of people unschooling in this area, whereas like I've lived in all different parts of the country, and this is the first time where I've experienced where like that's a word that you don't have to explain, and maybe a lot of the kids you meet are already doing it, and there's a lot of things for the kids to do and join in on just about anything they're interested in. There's something happening for them. So I think the most useful book I read when my oldest son was still a baby was the Teenage Liberation Handbook. And even though I was reading that book when he was a baby, it definitely swayed my opinion as to what I was going to do with the rest of our lives together. So even though it wasn't relevant to his age yet, it was relevant to me. So, yeah.
I don't know if this is becoming more like a discussion about unschooling than like mothering and movement, so if it's different. But do you feel like there is a space between teachers and the traditional school atmosphere and unschooling advocates and participants to build bridges together and kind of find connections between them, or that they are pretty distinct movements?
Well, I think that people become teachers because they're really interested in educating children, and so I think there's definitely a really strong link. And I also think that people that are unschooling make that choice because they're making specific educational value judgments about how they want to do things. And for me, I can't speak for everyone, but for me, like, I continue to fight for things in the education system because not everybody is going to have the opportunity to be unschooling, and I think that all kids should have the opportunities to have better education, better life, whatever. So I think it's really important that we don't just forget everybody else.
So we're gonna move on to our next panelist, and this is Jamie Holy Eagle, and she's from Minnesota. She's a mother of 2 and a guerrilla gardener and founder of the Medicine Seed Project.
Alright, Jamie, we're just waiting for you to come up on the projector. It just takes a second for it to warm up. There we go. Alright, you ready? Okay. Alright, you're all set.
Okay, so, again, I apologize in advance. I'm getting over a cold, so I kind of have that, still trying to not do that. Okay, so I've been involved in a few different activist type projects. But I think what's significant about it is that before I had kids, you know, I was not active. This my opinion. I was pro-human rights, and, you know, was kind of not a feminist, you know, was pro-choice, but I mean, I really didn't put a lot of thought that much into what I did or said. It wasn't until I had kids and I spent time as a stay-at-home mom, which was really a nice, really hard, isolating time. It wasn't until then that, you know, I started doing a lot more reading and then having a daughter that I began to really examine my place and what I was doing and my role and how I fit in things. So my first, you know, like I spent, you know, my pregnancy was, again, like, I was, you know, having a cesarean, was having, you know, having baby's growth, and, you know, those are really challenging. But, you know, doing all this reading, I began to realize that, no, there's really better methods. You know, it was more than just 2 years ago. in being a mom, and that, you know, I had a responsibility as a Native woman to really help my children grow up to be like strong Native people. So I, you know, I did everything right, you know, ate right, you know, I had the certain midwife, and all that stuff. And then when I got to the hospital, it was just like a classic train wreck intervention. When I was 21. You know, I was treated terribly in a really racist hospital, which I didn't find out until after the fact. I mean, they were really, it was a really terrible experience. And so, you know, whereas I could have just taken that and just been really sad and stuff, I began to read a lot more than that and be a lot more determined in everything that I did. And so, you know, I kind of used that to, you know, I ended up with an attachment caring with my first daughter. You know, I carried her everywhere and said that she'd be kind and like enjoy being a mom. And then I got pregnant again, and, you know, no do about that, because I was living in rural North Dakota at the time. But I knew that I didn't want the same experience as the first time. But, you know, so I was looking at like home birth midwives, and there was nothing out there. Again, this is like way in North Dakota. And so I, you know, did a lot of reading and came across unassisted childbirth. And so it's kind of the last resort, but then, you know, the more I read about it, the more comfortable I became with it, and ultimately that's what we ended up doing. And for me, that's really significant because her birthday's next week and she'll be 8 now, you know. And so, you know, when I look at that anyway, when I look at that experience, you know, for me it was incredibly empowering. I mean, with this first experience, it was like the worst thing ever. To have this really cool, awesome experience, you know, on my own with her dad, like just that's exactly how we wanted it, you know, 6-hour labor, you know, like preparing, you know, it was flawless. So we still lived in rural North Dakota at that point, and then after a year or so we moved back to our hometown. And so when I started school, you know, I'd been out of school for a few years, and then I had to be a toddler. But I, you know, was a lot more aware that whatever I became involved in, you know, I felt very comfortable that I need to be able to bring my kids everywhere. And so I was, while I was at school, you know, I was really involved in the daycare. I was really involved with our Native student organization. You know, I rocked everywhere with me. I became involved in campus anti-racism trainings. I realized I really wanted to model for my girls that, you know, what leadership can be, you know. So now it's been a few years. Now they are 9, almost 8. And so, you know, what I do now is tutor for Native kids. So I tutor Native kids in the public school system, grades K through 10. I am a Girl Scout leader, which is not really what I wanted to do. First, again, you know, I felt I really didn't just involve that leadership. I wanted somebody else to be the kind of person. But there wasn't anybody. My girls weren't being involved in it. So now it's been going for a year and a half. They volunteered with, you know, like they just volunteered at the last call out and served meals to their elders. You know, so I'm like helping them see that, you know, they can be respected people, that they can, you know, help support their community even as a young. And so when I think about it, you know, if I had kids, it definitely would be really kind of responsibility now. What I do, you know, my biggest focus is right now is moving in the spring is,
Sorry, can you speak up a little bit? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. So right now I do a lot of community gardening projects. And again, one of the important components of it is that they need to be child-friendly spaces. I coordinated a school garden at my daughter's school, so that's starting in the 2nd year. We worked with 2 New American gardens. New American is not Native space, that would be like refugee didn't know how long I've been talking for, so sorry.
Do you feel like you're ready to move on to Q&A? Do you have more stuff we want to talk about?
Yeah, like I said, I was thinking about on the way home, I was just thinking is that like, despite that really active involvement in my community, I still have a lot of things that I really carry on a lot. One of the things I deal with most, isn't so much about worrying, but just anger. Like, I feel really guilty about this stuff that I have done. So we had a good morning, just me and her. And on the way back, I said, it was like, oh God, I've never felt Christmas cards. It was just bizarre. I have this guilt about not sending out these Christmas cards. And it's April. I thought the choices. So there's always that fear that, I should be doing more, I could be doing more, why aren't I doing more? But I could probably use more. There's communities people like what I'm doing, but maybe more. There can be more support somehow, but I'm not really sure how you recognize that. Alright.
So we'll open it up for questions or responses.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Are there, yeah, question. Can we come over here? You don't have to do this. I'm happy to repeat the questions, but if I know you, I'm probably going to ask you to stand yourself, just so you know.
Hi, I'm Scout. My question is, how do you instill the will to fight white supremacy in your children and keep them feeling good about themselves in the society you're currently living in?
Learn to repeat a little bit.
Again. Okay. What are some of the ways that you instill in your children the will to fight white supremacy and feel good about themselves living in a white supremacist society?
Well, with our Native with Girl Scouts. So as an organization, we do not have some issues with the structure. But our truth is all Native American girls self-identify and are, you know what Native or not or anything. Self-identify because I want them to have, a safe female space where they can explore this identity and just get to know other girls. Because, I grew up here and I was usually the only Native kid in my classes, and even now there's still, often the only Native girl in my classes. So giving them the space where they can be Native girls, I think that it's helped them develop a little stronger sense of identity and some solidarity, because I think that, racism, sexism wasn't very huge, especially, living in a kid that's, 90% white. Having these female Native spaces can help with that. I've seen me call people out, and, I supported them. I believe you. If something feels racist to me doesn't feel right, I'm not going to tell you. I just can't understand. No, you absolutely can't understand. We talk about, what's good about them, why they're awesome. That sounds like a really shallow thing, but every day, I think that it's talk about, body, I like your body the way it is, your appropriate size for a baby to be, rather than and it has started me, and when I was pregnant with my first daughter, I was like, it's going to be awesome, it's going to be dark like me, we're going to learn to really tackle this. And I could help instill early on. It's really awesome being brown. Wow. Really considerably later than my So I didn't really think about that. For me, I tried so much culture to skin color. And for her, I still want her to celebrate her skin color. Even if it doesn't match me. Now my younger daughter is more than 3. And so I have to be able to support both of them and help them appreciate and love what they look like, even if it doesn't look like me, and that they're still considered, legit Native folks. Hope that helps.
Jeannie, so I'm sorry to bring up something that I know because we both know each other, but there was a while back where one of your daughters was experiencing other like white students at school saying racist things to her. And so my question is, when that was going on, like, not only like what was helpful for you in talking to her, but if you could think of ways, like if you had a community of people around you supporting you and her, what are ways that they could have supported her in that situation?
Well, like, so what had happened was there was a boy in her class who did something big, and he was making fun of her being dark, you know, told her she shouldn't be going outside anymore, she's already so brown. And so she was pretty upset when she got back. And then justifiably, I was pissed, you know, because I'm a kid, you know, how dare you. But I realized that, you know, like, I've dealt with years and years of racism, you know, in this community, and so I have, you know, a bigger vocabulary for it. And I'm, you know, maybe stronger sensitivity to it. But with her, it was pretty foreign, and it was a pretty new thing. It wasn't anything that she was really aware of. And she wasn't asking mad, you know, and so I realized that, like, as much as I want her to, you know, quiet about it, I had to follow her lead, you know, so what do you want to do about it? You know, so she thought about what she said at the time, but she started this school like 6 months ago. You know, for her, she just wanted, you know, an apology. She wanted not a public apology. She wanted to move away. You know, but, so he was, you know, his table was moving a little further away from hers. And so, like, I was impressed with it, you know, and she was into it, and that wasn't, let's say, it wasn't for me, and I realized that I needed to do that in check, and I reacted to her reactions. But from the school, you know, and I'm lucky that my friends do support her, you know, like they do think really highly of her, they respect, you know, they don't treat her like a little kid. You know, they can help her fit in with this. I wish that there had been a stronger response from the school and from the teacher when it was promotion to the teacher, and she was like, oh my god, it's terrible, I'm kind of shocked. And I think maybe she talked to her and told her it wasn't okay. But I think what needed to happen was a conversation in the classroom about, you know, not so much, you know, saying it to people, but more about, like, she is darker. These are things that we notice that kids notice. And that we need to be able to talk about it rather than, I think, I would say the class probably operates more than it's only one kind of model. And I don't think that's helpful because I want her to be proud of who she is. And you don't want that to be something that people have to like in spite of her. It's very much a big part of her identity.
Any other questions? Okay, Jamie, thanks. If you want to watch the live stream, you can check in with us later at the office.
Okay, cool. Alright,
Great. So we are going, well, first I didn't get a chance to thank you, Sasha, for sharing. And we're going to, so, you want to go, you want to go? Yeah.
Somebody's
Jennifer. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay. I made some notes. I'm just going to open my computer, but I'll just say who I am. But I'll wait for Robbie first. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Jennifer. I'm from Seattle, originally from Texas, but I've been in Seattle for a while, 10, 11 years. I have 3 children. I have a son who's 21, and then I have a daughter who's 13, and another son who's 11. I was a single mom with the first child for the first 7 years, and then I got married and had 2 children, and I've been divorced for a while. So I'm a single parent, sort of, who shares custody with my ex. So I have a little bit of different circumstances where there's 2 parents in their lives, but we're not parenting together in the same homes. An interesting story, I was telling my 11-year-old son that I was coming down here to speak on this panel, and I was just saying, I don't know what to talk about, what do you think I should talk about? He said, well, you can talk about how when you're a mom and you're an anarchist, you you have to go, you have to leave the house a lot, and you have to worry about the police, and you've had to tell us that if the police ever come to the door, don't open it. And that's like my 11-year-old son's interpretation of what my life is. I thought it was really cute. It's pretty accurate, actually. So that was what he thought I should talk about, but I think I'll add to that. So I guess I'm going to talk a little bit more about like recent stuff, because I was involved in the Occupy stuff, which was like the mass movement work that's happened recently, and some of the challenges that I found working in that environment, and then what's happened in post-Occupy, which has been just a continuation of what was going on during the mass movement work, only in smaller little groups, but discovering some really serious problems being in this work as a mom, as a woman, things I think that we need to talk about and address. We want to bring more families, moms, dads, parents together, single parents, children. Like, I have serious problems and concerns with having children in spaces with some of the things that have happened over the last 2 years. And I think that really is something that we have to talk about. So, obviously, most of you know, generally speaking, in movement work, mass movement work, or smaller campaign work, anything beyond little cadre or smaller groups of people, anytime you try to put coalitions together, what you usually find is, younger single people, usually males or couples, sometimes single women, but mostly, especially in Seattle, that's what you see. It's men or couples. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes single women with no children. Or you have like the more middle-ish class type of people who can afford to participate in movement work because they have family or resources to take care of their children, so they're able to come out and work. What you don't see a lot of is more, again, I'm speaking about my general area, you don't see a lot of working class, two-parent families where both of them are working full-time to support the family because they have to. You don't see them come around a lot and do the work because and I'll go into why later, but it's obvious why. They don't have time. They're worried about paying their bills and feeding their kids. So movement work is a luxury for these types of individuals, and that is a problem that also needs to be addressed. So basically what that leads to is that you end up with movement work or campaigns or coalition work that doesn't have any real praxis around dealing with patriarchy and issues of like mothering and what it means to have, like, you're having the face-to-face interactions with the next generation of who's going to inherit all of these problems. And those people are completely left out of the dialogue because we don't have a structure in place to support them being involved in this mass movement work. So you end up with a real one-sided narrative. And I think that's a huge flaw, and that's a lot of times why things stall when you're in these big coalitions or movement work or whatever. So I guess what obviously is lack of support from the community. Child care has been mentioned several times. I mean, it's something that's always thought of kind of as the last minute. It's thought of at all. It comes from other parents, mothers mostly. And we're already burned out. I mean, we're already burned out from trying to do movement work and take care of our own families, and then we want to do the caring thing by providing care for other children. But then after a while, it just gets really old because you're always like put in that role and the caring labor role. And sometimes you need a break from that, and that doesn't really happen very often. A couple other challenges you see, obviously, is the thing that I've seen a lot lately is the gender violence, either emotional, physical, or sexual. As a parent, you're pretty protective of yourself and your children. And if that's what's going on around you, you're not going to come out and you're definitely not going to bring your kids. Because your kids are not going to want to sit and watch some guy and a partner, like all that play out in front of them. Like, I don't want to shelter my children from the realities of the world, but I also don't want to bring them in environments where it's unsafe. So there's that, and then of course there's the state repression, which is, I think you spoke about. It's a much different environment now. I've had to have many conversations with my children about, this is what you do if the police come here. Especially after Seattle May Day last year, it was really intense. I really wanted to take my kids away from the house, because I was really frightened. So there's the state repression conversation that we have to have with children, and that's really intense and really scary. So So that's kind of what it's looked like for me, at least over the last, I guess it's been almost 2 years now. It's been, my children don't really want to come out and sing with me, the younger ones, because they've heard me on the phone, or they've read some things that I've written, and they're not comfortable with the things that are going on, and I don't want to shelter them from it, but I'm also not going to force them into positions where they're going to feel anxious. So it's really frustrating. I don't really know what solutions we can have. I mean, we can do childcare collectives where mothers feel more support, that their children are being cared for, better safety measures at events so that the children can be safe. I think a good example of this was, believe it or not, Seattle May Day last year was like, I organized the part that was in the Westlake Park, where we had a permit for like music and food and all that, and I promised everyone that was a green zone. And I told everyone who had talked about having plans for other things to happen that day. It's like, nothing can happen in this area. This is for children and families and people who don't want to be at risk of arrest. And I really, really had to push that hard and spend a lot of time having conversations with people, making sure that they respected that. And that's really important. I think you want to get people out and engaging. And the most important thing is meeting each other. Because it is very isolating to parents. And if you're not meeting other parents because no one wants to come out because they're afraid or they don't understand or they don't have the resources to make it, you never meet each other, which is the most important thing I think about movement work. Challenging the state's great. Challenging capitalism is great. Meeting each other is the best part. It's the only way we're ever going to grow. And so that's that experience. And that's really all I guess I was going to say.
Great. Do we have some questions?
So I was just really interested in what you had to say about in Seattle, like a lot of like young men and couples and stuff, like organizing or like being involved in like activities or whatever, or like actions or like whatever, that probably don't look like this. That probably look like something completely different, like talks about theory or like this sort of like cool dance party in the street sort of thing, and I have thought a lot about the way that tactics are hierarchicalized, like this is a tactic, what's going on, and what they're doing is a tactic too, but because this is like mothers and like feminine people organizing it, like it's not looked at as important as like organizing a protest or like a talk about high theory or something like that. So do you feel like people, like if you share the same sentiments with me, do you feel like if you confronted people about that, like how they respond? Because like I'm still not brave enough to like confront people unless I just like talking about it in a space where I feel comfortable, not with people who actually do that.
I've confronted a lot of that actually directly in Seattle. A lot of the male-dominated spaces, the male-dominated orgs, the male-dominated events, I've completely confronted those people. And they get really defensive. And if you push really, really hard, then they start attacking you back. It is a challenge. Activism in and of itself is very patriarchal, and it's very, like, you think when you're dealing with anarchists and communists and anti-state communists or whatever people are calling themselves now, that they have an understanding of how authoritarian structures are very damaging. But as it turns out, they really don't understand that. So, challenging is really important. Challenging them face-to-face is important. You may not really get anywhere with that. I think the best thing you can do is, like what I was just saying earlier, meet other people who feel the same way you feel, and continue to talk about what they're doing so that you can continue to bring it out into the public sphere. But organize alternatives, which usually end up being a lot cooler and a lot more fun anyway. Because sitting around and having talks about theory and discussion and book readings and all that can be okay, but that's all you ever do. You go to get really bored and then all you come back. So organizing fun events, there is value in all of that. Like I said, use your may not have your great victory at the end of the day, but you've met other people who have the same feelings that you may have, and you exchange information, and you may meet down the road, and then you build. Building is really slow. Building community is really slow. It doesn't happen overnight, especially if you want to sustain it long term. So another thing that I do is like food justice work. So we pick up and distribute a lot of food every week in the Seattle area, and I've met a ton of people that way that I never would have met any other way. Everyone needs food. Food is expensive, and if you reach out to people and say, hey, this is a real need that I can help you with, people are automatically willing to come and have conversations with you, and then you can build the conversation slowly to more political type discussions and figure out where people are in their lives. So yeah, the theory-dominated stuff, I think, it's not going to lead where they think it's going to lead, and that's too bad. But we still have to challenge it because it can be very. It can make people walk away thinking that's all there is. So we have to be very, very visible with that. That's not all there is. There's other things that you can do, and it's over here. And here's what we're doing. Why don't you come and check it out?
Ava?
Yeah. Hi. You touched upon the authoritarian structures that are unfortunately still so prevalent in activism. But especially since we're talking about families and parents and children and that dynamic, it's been my observation that the hierarchical and authoritarian model is very much what, if people have been raised with it, it's their go-to program, and they duplicate it with their children or other people's children without recognizing that that's a program that's running unconsciously. I just was wondering, I know what I do in my life with our collective and our family of consensual living, which is often very challenging, but I was wondering what things you might have found to lessen to raise the awareness about unconscious, hierarchical, and authoritarian styles of interaction with children, in particular, in your activism experience.
You mean directly like with my children or with children that come around movement work or both?
With your children within the community and the movement as is it your experience, which I do not know. And then also with other children that you come into it within the space, and also sometimes mitigating the authoritarian models that are coming around into the movement through the parents that are activists, but when it comes to their children, suddenly snap into complete authoritarian and believe that that's an appropriate expression to the individual who happens to be younger.
Well, as far as like the movement work goes, in Seattle anyway, in my experience, we have not really had a lot of interactions with children. There aren't that many people with children around. We have one comrade who has 3 small children that we bring around for a lot, and they are like very much community support for that family. Like I said, I don't bring my kids around because I'm just not comfortable with it. So most of our interactions, I guess, within this movement that I'm talking about now would have been more with like the really older teenager type street kids that came to the camp because they knew that we would feed them and give them a place to stay. And that was very challenging. Because sometimes there were things and behaviors that were happening that were harmful to themselves and to other people around them. But we didn't want to be authoritarian because we told our whole thing in the camp was like, no authority. That's what we're here for. We're all here to learn together. So to walk that thin line between, no, you can't shoot drugs in your tent and leave your needles on the ground. We have to tell you this for safety reasons. And yeah, it comes across as being super authoritarian, but sometimes you have to be that way. But otherwise, it's just, I think, a lot of trying to teach people how to make decisions for themselves. Going through a thought process of harm reduction, like, will this hurt me? Will this hurt other people around me? Let's sit and talk through that decision that you want to make. So that's sort of like, I think that's like the baseline for trying to teach how to make decisions without having an authority to tell you how to make a decision. And it takes a long time. Because you're right, people are not taught to do this for themselves. We had so many people coming into the camp who didn't understand there were no rules. They're like, well, what do we do? What do we do about this? What do we do about this? Well, there's no rules. We'll have to figure that out ourselves. And it was messy. It was so messy. But that's I mean, it's basically just time, lots of talking, lots of patience. No, I'm not going to make that decision for you. Let's make the decision together. And it's really difficult because our society teaches everyone that if you have a problem, you need to look and somebody else will tell you how to solve it. And that's obviously very destructive to society in general. And it's going to be really hard to teach kids how to do that for themselves. Especially street kids who've been on their own for a really long time for various reasons. So they're already very traumatized by their experiences. And they're most of the time losing their family members because they've been kicked out or run away or whatever. We became like their family. It was a very interesting experience.
You mentioned having a secure space on May Day and then post-May Day retention. And so that actually made me think about the idea of security culture in a bunch of different ways. I don't have kids myself, but how, I mean, generally we think about that, or like the groups I'm in think about that as like how to make sure there's not a cop in your presence. But really, like, for security culture to be effective, it has to be much broader than just trying to keep law enforcement out. It has to be like an actual culture. So I wondered if you just have any thoughts about like what's worked for you, or just things you've seen that have like made, I guess, I mean, obviously your kids aren't comfortable, so they don't feel secure, like, and they're very aware that you're susceptible to law enforcement actions and stuff. If you have any comments on that, I guess.
Well, I think I'm probably more careful than other people are because I do have children. Because if I'm more careful both about like gender violence and state repression. Because if something happens to me, if I get harmed in any way, or I get scooped up, or if I get taken out for any reason, that leaves my children extremely vulnerable. So I have to be extra careful, but I don't want to become paranoid. So like the basic things that I've always thought of is like, don't discuss anything with someone that you don't know very well that could possibly at all be turned around and used against you. So like people that come around, I'm very, very closed off until I figure out who they are. And so that's just like a really baseline of security culture is watch what you're discussing with you and in what spaces as well. Like just basic stuff, like none of your electronic communication is ever secure. If you have to talk about something, you need to do it face to face. Just basic stuff like that you'd be really shocked that people don't even follow at all. Like when you see state repression happening and you read charging documents and you read about how they pull people's text messages and you're like, what? You shouldn't even, like, don't do that. That's like basic stuff. So, so I am super careful because I don't want to take it away from my children. And they don't want me to take it away. They're not terrified. Don't get me wrong. They're not sitting around here telling the house, going, oh my gosh. It's not like that at all. I've been very honest with them, though, about, especially with the grand jury investigation around May Day. I had to talk to them about what that means. You get a subpoena, you go in there, and you don't talk. They put you in prison for that. You understand that I would never talk. I would never snitch. And that would mean that I could possibly have to go to prison for that. And they understand the politics behind that. And as much as they would hate for me to go away, they understand why I would make that decision. So they don't sit around terrified all the time. They understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. But I've been really honest with them about it. And we've had some really interesting discussions about it. But they also need to know this is the world we live in now. Like, they're coming up into this world themselves. They need to have good security culture around their behavior. They need to understand what the state's doing and what it's capable of doing.
So I know that you're very into patriarchy, and I know that you must be. So how do you, and like I know your daughter, like we talked about it before, has experienced like really patriarchal, like messed up situations in school.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious as to how you kind of undo the damage or like unplanted seeds that being in like a school setting plants in your kids' minds to make them feel comfortable and like strong in themselves and like stand against unjust things when they're taught that these things are right in school like every day.
I know, yeah. So my daughter's 13, she's been bullied because she's like 6 feet tall. So she's taller than like middle school for just this last year. She's talked with everyone, almost like even the teachers. She's really intelligent, like reads a lot of books and doesn't really fit into like the standards of what girls are doing at that age where we live. So she's been bullied at school and it's caused a lot of problems. We're probably going to take her out of school at this point because it's not working out. I've had long hours and hours of conversations with her about how she doesn't need to conform to what other kids think she needs to be. And if I've talked to direct action tactics for bullies, most of the time it's boys that are bullying her and they're shorter than her and they're making fun of her for being tall. And I told her, you should say, well, you're just short, and so you're jealous. You know, just teach her, like, confront it directly, either telling them to stop doing it or to just do it back. And then say, how does that make you feel when I'm saying these things back to you? Trying to, like, do the teaching moment thing. She may not quite be there yet for that, but we're working on it. And schools are terrible. They're really bad. We're probably going to take her out now because it's just gotten really bad. She's not happy. My 11-year-old son hasn't really encountered any problems yet with that, but we'll see how that goes.
Do you have any questions? Lauren has a quick announcement before we move on to the...
I have two quick announcements. So, I'll do them one at a time. So the first one is that there are like 7 people doing childcare, and one of the reasons that there are so many people doing childcare, and listening to the childcare bucket for putting dollars in, one of the reasons that there are so many people doing childcare is because this is a response to like complaints from kids about how childcare is done, and we're trying to address some of them. And like in this one event, like we weren't able to address all of the complaints from the kids about the way that childcare works, but we're trying. And one of them is having enough adults so that like kids can do different things in different places at the same time. So that if kids don't relate to one person, then they can be with another one. So that if they need specialized attention, they can get that attention. So that's like a ton of people, and probably if everybody throws like a tiny bit of money in here, I'll be able to give them a couple dollars each. But childcare is really important. It's work. It's something that we value. It's something that I hope everybody in this room values. And so I'm going to pass this around, and maybe people can throw a couple dollars in for childcare. The other announcement I have to make is that sort of the next part of this like project that doesn't have a name and is not formalized in any way whatsoever is that we want to do a project where we're talking to kids about this stuff and asking kids about like really hard questions that we don't really want to hear the answers to. Like, do you like having a parent that goes to actions? Do you like having a parent that's been arrested and gone to jail? Does it feel good? Do you wish that your parents didn't do political work? Do you want to do political work? How do you feel about the cuffs? How do you feel about authorities? And I think a lot of the answers to those questions aren't going to be the answers that we would want our kids to give, and like maybe not what we would want to hear, which I think is like a starting place for us to talk about what kind of a community we have, and what kind of a culture we have, and how that affects kids. So if you have kids or you think you know somebody who would be interested in having their kids be a part of this project, the first thing that we're going to do is interview kids audio only, because kids get really shy and we have no interest in like exploiting their faces. Kids get really shy. So the first thing we want to do is interview kids without their parents there. So like somebody's going to take my kid and not have me there, so she's not giving the answers that I want to hear, and ask her these questions that I don't really want to know the answers to be honest. So I'm just going to send this around, and if you have kids that you think would be interested in doing this, or if you know somebody and you want me to contact you to give you the information so that you can pass that information to them, that would be great.
Hey, Lauren. Related to that, I know that a bunch of us are here from the Bread and Roses Parents and Family Group here, and we have a survey that's along the same lines for parents and children to fill out about what it's like to be a parent or a child in the movement. It's like just a 10-question survey, and I brought, we've got some flyers that have the link to it and our information too, so it would be awesome if we could get information in a variety of ways, however people feel comfortable with that. So if you're interested, these are over with the names.
One more thing, Linda, do you mind coming up to talk about reading your phone?
Hi everybody, I'm Linda, and we have a youth program here every Saturday morning at 10:30. We have a book exchange program where we give kids books. They can pick out books for their age level, and they can get books and they can exchange them back the next Saturday. And we also make waffles and stuff for the kids. So that's every Saturday morning at 10:30. So guys, don't forget we have flyers in the front office. Thank you.
And there are waffles, like for real, like with a waffle iron. Okay, I'm done. Thanks for listening.
Okay, so, next, I think, Diana, are you the speaker?
Sure. Okay, let's see. So, I've been listening and trying to figure out, since I'm obviously a different generation from most of the other speakers, how to make my perspective and my experience and, you know, how to make it relevant. Because, you know, I think I can tell some of my history and my experiences in a very encapsulated way. And Tony, who is my son and is here, also can, you know, tell his point of view. But I also realize that, at least for me, there is a different background or context, which isn't about that the state was nicer or easier or anything like that. I actually think it's more about some of the movement structures and what the things that we tried to really put in place in the era that I was, well, I'm still working, but and part of many things, but I don't have small children anymore. So I was, you know, active all through the 70s, 80s, well, and still am. I was part of a revolutionary anti-imperialist organization called Prairie Fire Organizing Committee. We had a very central to all of our politics were anti-white supremacy and anti-racism, anti-male supremacy and anti-sexism, and we also had a very I would say, child-positive approach. And what I mean by that is that from a very early stage in the organization, we did have everybody in the organization was organized, parents and non-parents, into child care teams. We called them teams, you could have called them collectives, whatever, so that everybody was involved in one way or another in caring for kids and supporting people who were the parents. And that, however, was not on the side of all the other work we did. So I feel like one of the things that is really disturbing to me or really reflects the problems in the current situation is how much I'm hearing and have heard in other spaces how much, especially women, feel that there is a conflict and a dichotomy between activism and raising children. And that, you know, I understand, I hear that's real. People experience it, and it's a very problematic thing. But I have to say, I don't think it has to be that way. I mean, I really don't. I understand there are different circumstances and challenges in this era, but I guess I feel very strongly that if we are serious at all about challenging imperialism, the state, racism, sexism, we have to figure out a way of bridging that dichotomy. And we have to insist as women and trans people that gender respect and be at the center of our politics. And so, you know, I know that there's no easy answer. It's not like I can say that and insist that that is the center of our politics. And the whole thing about the hierarchical nature and the authoritarianism and the prioritizing of theory over other things, you know, is bullshit, as people have said. But, you know, on the other hand, I have to say, I mean, I'm somebody who does like theory. I mean, I do like it, and I'm sure there are a lot of other women in this room, as well as men, and trans people, who do like it. But there's the way in which it's been done and constructed, which mimics that other academic format, where you end up feeling like, oh my God, let's please have fun. Anyway, so that's just my overall point of view, which I had to kind of say since I'm responding to other people. So I ended up going underground in relationship to fighting for Puerto Rican independence and also black liberation. And at some point, while already underground, I had a baby, which was Tony. And 2 weeks after he was born, we realized that we were surrounded by the FBI because of some work that we had been involved in. And so we had to pick up and leave where we were. We did within 4 hours, and the good news is that we were able to get away. And I was able to continue to raise Tony and then have another child, Layla, and you know, that was all, fortunately, a good story with a happy ending. But of course, it didn't have to end that way. And of course, I realized at the time, every day until I resurfaced and came, which was 9 years later, you know, that it could possibly have a really bad ending. It didn't have a totally happy ending because my partner Claude and another member of our collective ended up going to prison for some time, but it was better than what we thought at that moment. So I think the thing is there's always contradictions between being a parent and safety and living in a society that you really want to change. And what anchored me for most of the time, I mean, on and off, I mean, of course there were moments when I was just, you know, just totally freaked out, but really was understanding that really women and mothers around the world do deal with children in circumstances that were far worse than the ones I was facing. You know, black and brown mothers today, and in that era, I mean, they are dealing with the police and repression and racist attacks and having to worry about their children going to prison all the time. I mean, and that's just a given, and they have no choice about it. So yes, the difference for me was that I had a choice. I did choose a certain political path, but that was in order to change the circumstances for other women and other people. And I think that's really something very important to hang on to in general, is that, you know, this is obviously just my perspective, but our connections with our children are in the context of wanting to change the world. I mean, or that's how I see it as a social justice activist. I don't see the issue of child raising and parenting as separate from my commitment to revolutionary struggle. I don't see how I could. That's for me. And so I always tried to check myself in the framework of what choices I was making in order to recenter that. And that, to me, I mean, there's a way of doing that, of seeing that, that's very macho. It was about, oh, how militant can you be, how tough can you be, how much, you know, how dangerous can you be? And that's, to me, macho, sexist, and just, again, imitates the culture around us. But there's another way of seeing that is about reconstructing our stance in the world and insisting that we are going going to make include our children in a struggle for change. That doesn't mean that our children are necessarily going to end up just agreeing with our view of how you change things. They may not. And that you have to respect. But I guess I don't see it as a question. I mean, if Tony had said, okay, I'm out of here after he was 10, or I had brought him to every demonstration and event, etc., I would have had to respect that, and I did try with both my kids to do that. But it wouldn't have really made me question what I was about. I mean, we are separate people. We are not the same, You raise your children with your values, you communicate them, and then they have to be their own people. But I do feel like it's not exactly, you have to try and figure out your own compass, your own political compass and anchor in terms of what you want to do and what you want to be and where you want to situate yourself. And for me, I'm going to be struggling until I'm not struggling at all, or that's just how I feel. And that's not necessarily the choice for everybody. But what I reject is sort of feeling like you do want to, people who, especially women, want to struggle, want to continue, but see that vast gap between what struggling means and being a good parent to your child and raising them with, loving and protective values. And that's where I think all of us have to come together and really do the hard work of figuring out how not to make that such a gap. So those are the main things. I will make a little, I do talk about a lot of this. I have written a memoir which is called Arm the Spirit, A Woman's Journey Underground and Back. A lot of it is about motherhood and parenting while I was underground, as well as many other things. So, if you're interested in more of that, you can definitely check out the book. And I guess I will stop there, and I think, I would think it makes more sense for Tony to talk before we have Q&A.
Yeah, that's fine. Let's do Q&A together. Maybe both answer the same question.
If I have anything to say. Sure, so I guess I was asked to speak just about my mother's, and just being raised in a political environment and what that is for a child. And I think for me, some of the most important choices that my parents I guess the most important choice that they made was to raise me in a collective atmosphere and environment where I had a lot of support and a lot of different parents, which I think is something that we should all be striving toward, given, I think we evolved in that kind of environment where we had multiple parents, and it wasn't necessarily your biological parents who were the dominant forces in your life and shaping you as a person. And at least when my father went to prison, that was extremely important, and especially now, whenever there is a large degree of state repression, it is really important to think about, the children, and that needs to be centered in all the political work that is being done, because we are about taking care of each other. And certainly, when my father went to prison, when my aunt went to prison, there was a huge community that existed to support my mother and other people in the collective who, didn't have as much support as they did previously, because the state had taken individuals away from our community. And just for me, that had a huge impact in just seeing individuals come to our support, whether that be to support us going to see my father on a regular basis, or just to, and of course to support my mother, who was working quite a bit during that time period, still does. But just being able to share the responsibility of raising myself, my sister, and other children in the collective, because there were 2 other children who were also impacted by resurfacing from being underground for all those years. And then I guess the other important thing, at least in my experience, was the way that my parents prepared myself, specifically given that I was the oldest child who was underground. How did the community prepare me for what was to then unfold in my life? And that was particularly difficult because I didn't even realize as a 8, 9-year-old child that we were underground. And so, really, I think they did a really good job of really preparing me to start thinking about politics in new ways, about the state and prisons in new ways, by just sharing experiences internationally with me and nationally about children who are faced with similar things, and people who, you know, of course across the world, who are struggling, and there's huge amounts of state repression that they're facing. So, and just seeing that as a young child really impacted me, and I think really when, you know, we were in court regularly, when my dad was incarcerated, it really gave me new perspective and made me feel like, okay, other young people have been through this before. There's, you know, there's things that I can do, and there's support for me. Unfortunately, and like, you know, there's lots of networks out there that really supported me, like the Rosenberg Fund for Children, for example, has monetary support for people who are persecuted throughout the United States or throughout the Americas. But things like that are established are really important, especially when you have parents who don't necessarily have the same amount of support that we had built in within the political organization, which wasn't only a political organization, clearly. So I guess those are really important things that we should certainly think about today in doing political work and in supporting our next generations. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Lauren, you want to start with the question?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to say one thing before I ask a question, and that's that, like, to prepare for this, I reread Art and the Spirit, because I read it like when it first came out a few years ago, or maybe more than a few years ago now. And I hadn't read it since, and I found that, like, aside from addressing this topic, which obviously people who are still in this room are interested in, it was really relevant to me to look at the internal ruptures within movements around race and gender, and the sort of history of that from like a personalized perspective, especially like as we experience those again in the movement. And so I would recommend it for both of those reasons, and they sell at AK Press across the street. And then and I was going to ask Tony about the Rosenberg Children's Fund, but we already talked about it. And then I wanted to address this comment that you made at the beginning, Diana, about not being able to separate your political work from your mothering work. And like I feel like you were sort of framing what you were going to say when you were talking about that, but I think that that's a really important thing, and I was wondering if you could sort of elaborate on like how that worked for you, and how you wish that worked for other people, and you know, is that enough question to get it going?
Yeah, I would love other people to actually respond to that also. I mean, well, I mean, on the one hand, I do feel like that's the goal, or for me personally, that I don't want to separate it. But it's of course true that it's, you know, when you state that as a goal, it doesn't mean that it happens seamlessly. I mean, and that's sometimes I think where we fall into problems, just because, I mean, you know, just because something isn't automatic, it doesn't mean that it's something you don't want. So, I mean, you know, for me, okay, well, one time when I think it was actually very acute was when we came back after we were underground. When we were underground, you know, we were very careful. We didn't have that much political work that I mean, we had a political collective, we had a political outlook, etc. But we were very careful not to be involved in things that were going to expose us and get us arrested. So, but when I came back in 1990, well, the end of 1994, then I was, you know, presented with the decisions that now I could choose what political work was I going to do. But how was I going to do that political work since I had 2 young children, a partner in prison? I had to work to make a living for all of us. And even though, I mean, and none of it would have been possible if we didn't have a lot of support. But those were, you know, pressing questions for me. And of course, at some points, you know, I did choose staying home with my child and or going to a school event and not going to a demonstration or things like that. I mean, on a kind of very specific basic level. But for me, I overall felt like I wasn't going to, even though the path of least resistance or the easiest way would have been to basically, you know, go to work and deal with my kids. I mean, you know, I had to find schools for them. I wanted to become involved in their schools. I mean, and I did, you know, I do for various reasons, even though despite all the problems with public education, you know, feel like it's a terrain of struggle. So that was my conscious choice. And I didn't, but I wanted to do political work. I really, I mean, I had been out of it maybe more than ever. I wanted to do it because I hadn't been able to for 13 years, really, political public work. And so I figured out somehow how to, you know, become involved. I mainly became involved in anti-prison work back then, when actually it was even less a known issue than it is today. And some of it had to do with having a partner and a comrade in prison and many other comrades in prison. So that was sort of a natural thing. And then I, you know, also was very concerned with the issue of women in prison, which is where I started working with women in prison, which I still do today. So that's an example where the issue of the unit, you know, I had to figure out how mothering and motherhood combined with my political choices. And, you know, it wasn't always easy, but, you know, I feel like I was able to do it with support. I think isolation, and that's the thing I hear so much from, you know, mothers today, is that instead of being embraced and joined within the political communities, people are isolated and driven out. And that, you know, is just, you know, intolerable. It's unacceptable. I mean, that's what I feel our consciousness should be around it. Whether how we make it a reality, I'm not sure, but that's where I feel, what I feel is, you know, what we should feel.
Over here, sorry. Question?
Yeah. This is kind of a question and a comment. It was after having children and kind of being, you know, going into that natural, like, pulling back from the political sphere, it wasn't until there was, like, commons and community of the occupied that kind of included a children's area friendly actions to bring us, into a place where, oh yeah, we can go down and, there's coloring for the kids to do, and we can show our support. And so how can, I guess, the future of the movements include child participatory actions and a safe container for children to be involved in actions in political work?
I don't know, totally should I mean, the thing I feel is that, there are certain kind of general not guidelines even, but just values or approaches that I feel. But, that the problem is the actual work of figuring out what that looks like in the movement today, or within different communities even, each community has to do it differently. I mean, that's, some communities who are, just like the example around militant action. I mean, if there's a collective or a grouping that's more committed to militant action, whatever that entails, or direct action, then, that community has to make sure that they have thought it through, and that they have both a security culture and a sense of what a safe space and a safe alternatives for the children are. If that's not what the people are involved in, then there's a whole other set of considerations. So I think the thing is, I think we really need to really realize that people around the world struggle and address this question of children. They don't always do it perfectly, because this isn't a perfect world, but they do figure out how to have children and develop new generations of politically minded people and struggle. And they are, good parents to the best of their ability. So I feel like a lot we also should be learning from the experiences of other people, because I feel like in this country we actually have the least experience with that. And it would be really, and we need to look beyond our imposed borders to get that wisdom.
So, just in order to make sure that we have time at the end where we're all still here and have the energy to have the conversation, I want people to be able to have a group discussion. So if people could try to keep their questions specific to the panelists, so that if there are these broader questions about these things, we can all answer them together. That would be, I think that would facilitate us having a chance to have that conversation as a group. So sorry, I don't know who's on staff. Okay, yeah, Karen.
I had a question for Diana and a question for Tony. So the first one is, can you speak more to how the child care teams worked? And then the second question is, what was it like being a child with a big, broader political consciousness?
Okay, so the child care teams worked partly because we were a very tight and structured organization, which I know is not a common model now, which is part of the reason why it's not totally relevant, or it's relevant but not totally applicable. We had, we were an organization that we, did a lot of political work together, were involved with lots of different things, and then each person who had a child, man or woman, had a team that helped them with every aspect of their parenting lives, not just taking care of the kids. I shouldn't say every aspect, but most aspects. So, including making dinner and cleaning, and it just rotated. And the team had meetings, just like people have house meetings, there's a lot of involvement, and it's a big commitment. It was a big commitment, but it worked. I mean, more or less. I think sometimes it worked well for the parent in terms of support. It worked less well because I think issues of who, whether parents should have the final say, what their role was compared to other people. I mean, those were all things that were in continual evolution, and we didn't always make the right decisions about that at the time. Looking back on it, we can see it.
Well, I don't know if it's any different. Well, it's a little different for me, maybe, but any young person with radical politics is going to feel fairly alienated in school or anywhere. Wasn't just me. I'm sure we all in this room, depending on when we develop that politic. But yeah, certainly in school, I was labeled a lot of different things for my outspoken politics. But yeah, I think I certainly found a certain level of unity with other young people who had family in prison, and to a certain extent, certainly growing up in San Francisco, it's going to be different than in other places where there aren't as many young people who are politically conscious. So, at least for that, there was a certain level of other individuals who had similar politics. I don't know.
I'm gonna put myself on stack. I wanted to ask you, Tony. My son's father is in prison, and he's 8. And I just kind of wanted to ask you how old you were when your father went to prison, and how that impacted you socially. Or didn't you kind of just touched on it now, but just how, what sort of conversations you had with your family or your community around how to address that, if any, and
Sure. I was 9 to 13. I guess, going to school like in San Francisco, where a lot of my peers were going through similar or more extreme situations in their family, I would argue much more extreme than myself, given that I had such a large community of parents. I didn't necessarily feel like, like my situation was all that bad. Not that it wasn't bad, but shit gets a lot worse, and I kind of kept that in perspective. Not just trying to say like your father's in prison. Certainly it is. It's difficult, but I guess for me it wasn't as difficult because there was that community. But I don't know. I know that my parents and the community as a whole put me in schools where they could trust the teachers to understand my situation. And so I believe, like the majority of my teachers up to pretty much through high school knew or found out that my father was incarcerated, although he was only in a halfway house in high school. But either way, I don't think, because, growing up in an urban area where that's just commonplace at this point, the prison system is like completely embedded in all aspects of the lifestyle. So it wasn't like, if anything, it just helped me relate more to black and brown youth that I grew up with, who were probably inside themselves, in and out.